Welcome to the SRS Podcast. I'm your host, Aaron J. Babyar, and I'm the Training Director of Support Raising Solutions. Whether you're a new ministry worker or a veteran looking to increase your competence and confidence, Support Raising Solutions seeks to bless you in your quest to be a spiritually healthy, vision-driven, fully funded Great Commission worker. My guest today is Rob Parker. Rob works with the International House of Prayer in Kansas City. I'm sure that he's been involved in other ministries throughout the years, but I first heard Rob's name mentioned through a friend of mine and occasional podcast host, or guest, I should say, in Jen Fortner. But Rob, I appreciate you joining us today, and I wanted to introduce to you as someone that, you trained hundreds of missionaries in partnership development, haven't you?
Yeah, that's right. Like everybody, when I jumped into ministry 14 years ago, I wasn't really jumping in to be a support raising coach, but it's something that happened along the way just out of need, being in an environment surrounded by people who are raising their own support. And in this past 14 years, I've trained somewhere in the vicinity of about 2,000 people. Mm-hmm. Edited hundreds of support raising letters and
yes,
and coached hundreds of missionaries,
right.
Different ethnicities, different backgrounds, different continents. Mm-hmm. And it's been a real pleasure. It's been really exciting to see how God brings goers and senders together.
Yeah. Well, praise the Lord. I know that let's go ahead and get this out on the front side. Mm-hmm. Support Raising Solutions. We have our own products and of course our boot camp and stuff like that. But we are fine with letting people know that there's other offerings out there. We don't like to pretend that the only training in the world is the SRS boot camp, or the only book in the world is the God Asked by Steve Shadrach. But there are other God-honoring people out there that are doing wonderful work for the kingdom. Mm-hmm. So, Rob, I want to just mention on the front side, you are an author of a book called The Fully Funded Missionary, and you have your own online course called Fully Funded Missionary Training as well. But really, the main thing that we brought you on today to talk about is coaching and explain coaching. So before we jump into that, though, can you just tell us a little bit about you? Tell us about your family, and have you always been from Kansas City? Give us a little bit more to the who Rob Parker is, if you would.
Yeah. Well, it's a pretty interesting story, but my wife and I were married in 1990, and she was a believer. I wasn't, but I became a believer soon afterward, and really through prayers of my family and just witnessing my wife. But, we almost immediately jumped into lay ministry, and was just active in, our church, and really had some great leaders around us. But it wasn't too far into being born again that, the Lord started speaking to me about being a teacher and someone that would proclaim the gospel. And just through a process, just spent a lot of years preparing for that, had great mentors, served, read a lot of books, took some online courses. But the day arrived in 2006, and the Lord had been pointing at a ministry there in Kansas City, which surprised us. In fact, at that point, I'd been in the marketplace for 17 years in the aerospace industry, and when the Lord started pointing towards Kansas City, it was hard to deal with emotionally. And my wife and I were trying to talk about full-time ministry, but we were trying to talk about it without saying Kansas City. It was almost like if we said Kansas City, and it got out in the air, then you were obligated, because
where are you from originally? I'm curious.
Yeah, we were married and lived in Wichita, Kansas. It's about 3 hours from Kansas City. My whole family's there. Most of her family's there. My family's pretty much grown up in one 10-mile square area of Kansas, for 50 years.
Right.
And so that's why the thought of moving away someplace was a little bit intimidating, but
I've
You
never
know,
heard Kansas City kind of referred to as Nineveh before, but now I'm getting it. Now I'm getting it. For those people that aren't that familiar with the U.S., Kansas City and Wichita, they are both in Kansas, but they are not the same place. They have a very
yeah,
different vibe to them.
yeah. One is a little town that kind of popped up in the prairie, and the other one's really functions like a hub, like a port on the Missouri River, where
Mm-hmm.
lots of expansion to the west in the early days came through Kansas City, and
Yes.
so railroad boomed and all of that.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know how the Lord does it. He wins you over, and
Mm-hmm.
um, just lures your heart into loving well and to obeying, and you reach the point where, intimidated or not, scared or not, love's drawing you, and you can't tell that man no. And
Mm-hmm.
he won us over, and
Yeah.
in that really kind and gentle way that he does. And somehow, honestly, Aaron, I really don't know how. I knew that I was going to have to raise my own support,
Okay.
and I knew that if I didn't take care of the money issue, that this ministry venture would fail.
Okay.
I didn't have a model. I didn't have anything in mind. I I remember praying one morning and saying, Lord, what does it mean to go by faith alone? Am I supposed to just trust you? Should I work a part-time job? Do I live, poor? And a combination of those things, I really don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And he began lead me down the path of raising support. And, I read every book that I could find at the time. And after I'd read both of them, I still was dissatisfied, and so I began to pray, and the Lord, led us really graciously, and we put some things together and stepped out and raised our support, and it went really well, and we just thought that was normal, and
Oh,
we
there's so many listeners right now going, it's not
yeah,
normal.
yeah, and honestly, Aaron, if I can say it this way, we thought it was normal, but it wasn't until we got to our missions base and begin to serve and see how many people were struggling, and then start having conversations. It took a couple of years for us to realize that the Lord had done something completely unique with my
Yes.
wife and I. And um, I think, if I can say it this way, I think he had this training model in mind, this coaching program in mind. I
Mm-hmm.
think he had something in mind 10 years down the road. And he really set me up really well. And just, his grace and his kindness and him giving me creative ideas. I,
Right.
I just thought it was normal, but I didn't know the Lord was building something through me that would serve, thousands later. And
Yes.
so
Yes.
it was really kind of him. And really, it shows how much he cares about the worker being funded, and how much he
Mm-hmm.
cares about the Great Commission, is to,
Mm-hmm.
give me revelation and understanding. And I don't even know that I'm getting it. I just think it's normal.
Yeah, yeah. I won't go into my story because you're the star of this episode. But I will say I absolutely had a similar experience, but I failed for a few years first. So you got me beat on that one. I
Mhm.
made a lot of mistakes for a few years, but yeah, I definitely started to experience that, noticing the people around me, or rather them noticing me, and I wasn't living lavishly, but Marky and I had enough to do our ministry well, and feed our family. And I started getting lots of questions at one point, simply because I was being faithful, and
Yeah.
other ministry leaders were noticing and going, wait a minute, what's going on here? But I didn't have a coach. I'm convinced, Rob, that if I would have had a coach, oh my goodness, that would have made a major difference. I would have
Yeah.
gotten fully funded. I would have been probably more spiritually healthy earlier. There would have been a lot of differences. So even
Yeah.
though it's possible for someone to get fully funded without a coach, um, the odds are you're going to do a lot better, a lot quicker, a lot healthier if
Yeah.
you do have a support raising coach.
Yeah,
Now, with
that's
that in mind, I'm going to ask you real quick. There's different terms for support raising coaching, aren't there? Do
yeah.
you have a few of those off the top of your head that you can kind of throw out there?
Sometimes you'll hear partnership coach, accountability partner. Sometimes they would say, find someone that's doing it at the same time and do it together.
Hmm.
There's all kinds of
Hmm.
terms like that you might run into.
Hmm.
I prefer to use partnership development coach.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And there are like I know there's well, I mentioned Jen Fortner before.
Mhm.
I think on her website it says FPD. It's like Financial Partnership Development,
Yeah.
and I know that we frequently with SRS more and more have begun to use MPD. Ministry Partner Development,
Yeah.
and um, yeah, some of the stuff that I do through Exago, same thing, MPD. But then other times there's different terms. People talk about going out on assignment. Well, what they really mean is they're going out to raise up a team of people that will pray and give. And so there are different terms. In fact, this is not even exhaustive what you and I've said here over the past couple
Right.
of minutes.
Right.
But the idea is after training so after you go through the fully funded missionary training, or you go through a support raising solutions boot camp, or perhaps you go through an organizational training that your organization provides for you as the
Hmm.
listener, after that it's really good to have a coach, somebody who is or has been fully funded and knows what they're talking about, just for regular healthy interactions. So
Yeah.
with that being said, tell us a little more, Rob, in regard to what is coaching. I kind of set it up a little bit, but tell us a little bit more about what it is and kind of the
Yeah.
benefits, guidelines, tips, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Um, Aaron, most of the people that I've trained are at the very beginning of their missional careers. They go through an internship, they go through some training, and they're ready to launch out. We see them when they're transitioning from marketplace to ministry. And something that we've tried to do in our training is help them with partnership development training, support raising training, and then give them a season with a coach where they can go out for 3, 4, 5, 6 months focused on partnership development only, with the encouragement, help, strategy, and oversight of a coach, and raise their team. And then once that team's raised, then they start their assignment fully funded. Now,
Yes.
that's our ideal approach, and that's where our coaching model was born out of. Now it includes maybe a worker's been in the field 4 or 5 years. Their family's growing, their needs are growing. They've lost a little bit of partnership, and now they need to take a short season, maybe 3 weeks, maybe four
Right.
or 5 weeks,
Right.
uh, or
Some
maybe
people
they're
call that an MPD sprint. They've
yeah,
been fully funded, but something has shifted. The budget has changed, or they've added children, or
yeah,
prices have just gone up, or whatever. But they need to take a time and go, wow, I need to put my head down and
yeah.
really dig away at this temporarily.
And sometimes it's a missionary from a foreign country that's home on furlough, and maybe they're going to be home for 6 months, and they're going to take 3 months to work on their partnership. And so, we started, as I mentioned, with missionaries at the beginning of their career, helping them before they start ministry. But that's eventually that evolves, and you have to help everyone at every stage. But for us, our coaching model it's been really about coming alongside a worker, and through experience, sitting down with them, looking at their opportunities in their season, helping them put together the best strategy for their circumstance and their time frame, showing them some best practices, helping them with some material development, prepping them on phone call and appointments and excited friend asks, and just help them make sure their language is good and tight. And then
Yeah.
once they start the process of regular meetings, then that coaching relationship shifts a little bit from strategy and prep to a little bit more of encourager, a little bit of instruction, inspirer, and a little bit of accountability. And
Mm.
so it's been our experience that through this relationship, more people finish raising their support. Many will start, but without a coach, they get discouraged and they begin to wane and then drift. And maybe they've got 11 or 1200 a month, but they're just tired. And, I can figure out how to do it on 12. Well,
Right. Yeah.
some,
Unfortunately, that does happen too often.
yeah,
People lower their budget so that they can quote unquote report and kind of get onto the thing that they wanted to do in the first place. And sounds like a good idea, but boy, that rarely turns out so well, does it?
yeah, it's heartbreaking. And, we've witnessed, a lot of it in a lot of different organizations and, even here in Kansas City, but the coach can really help them. I see it time and time again. A coach helps them see opportunities that they have that maybe they didn't recognize at first. And so, the options get broader. The coach can also, we use what we call a weekly reporting tool
Hmm.
where that person's on this season, they're documenting their efforts and their outcomes, and they share that information with a coach,
Hmm.
and a coach can see potential pitfalls or um, can see some yellow flags, and we make adjustments, help them, and tweak their approach a little bit,
Yeah.
and they wind up being more successful. And
Well, let me
so,
tell you, I would have been a lot more successful if I would have had somebody like you or Ellis Goldstein or Jen Fortner. Like if I would have had somebody like that, it would have made, I mean, it would have made years of
yeah,
difference for
yeah,
me back when I first got started.
yeah,
That's for sure. So when
you,
you say coaching from this context, we're not, and I just want to define this really well for people. We're not talking about learning. Learning is good. Yes, by all means, read books. There's multiple books. I already mentioned Rob's your Fully Funded Missionary book. Of course, there's Funding Your Ministry by Scott Morton, and I
mhm,
mean, there's just a lot of great books out there. But
yeah,
that's learning. Read the Bible, of course. Oh, please read the Bible. But that's learning. Learning is different from training. Training is more boots on the ground. You're involved with other people that are doing it, and a lot of organizations do offer their own training, or there are some third party trainings out there, as we've already talked about. But
mhm,
coaching, that's different. That's after the training. That's somebody
right,
who's walking with you, not constantly, not holding your hand, not spoon feeding you, but they're walking with you with regular communication and interactions while you're actually busy about doing the work of raising support.
right,
That is what Rob, I believe you're saying, and I'm agreeing, is probably one of the biggest needs in support raising that largely there's it's not happening enough. There's not enough people that are actually seeing that as a value, as wow, I really need that. So I think we need to kind of segue and talk about what are the benefits. So Rob, I'm
yeah,
sure you got some stuff to say about that. What are the benefits that you see from coaching? Not just hey, everybody gets their money. I
right.
mean, obviously, people need the funds so their family ministry can thrive. But what are some of the other benefits?
Yeah, that's a great question, Aaron. What we've observed is when a missionary works with a coach, the percentage, I don't have the exact number, but the number of people that wind up fully funded is dramatically higher than
Mm-hmm.
those who, work without a coach. Um, but that leads to a number of things. When a missionary winds up reaching their goal, it becomes this very encouraging, almost affirming thing from the Lord. Where if you're constantly struggling, you're constantly coming up short, it starts playing a psychological game, on your mind and makes you wonder, am I really obeying? Am I really doing the right thing?
Right. Yeah.
And so there's this a confidence that comes from being in the will of God, and it's almost like this. He pulls out this big approving rubber stamp that says fully funded. It's like I did call you, and I did stir people, and I did stir hearts, and here it is, it's working. And so that confidence that comes, in their assignment is there, but then there's a confidence that comes when when they dive into their assignment and they start the work. Their prayer isn't, "Oh God, please send more." Their prayer is, "Lord, give me wisdom on stewarding this abundance."
Mm.
And then their heart's free to really engage with people and the work that they've signed up for. That's so encouragement and confidence is a big one.
Okay.
But also the coach can help them tweak a little bit of their language, help them with responses to emails and how to
That's a
follow up.
big one, by the way,
Yeah,
because there's a big difference between knowing in your head what you think's going to sound good and then what your tongue does, because they're
right,
they're
right.
really not the same things sometimes. And finding the right words for some of us is it's rather easy. For some of us, it's very difficult. I'm extreme on the verbal side.
Hmm.
I'm really bad at writing stuff down. So like
Yeah,
if I if I have to send an email or something, I learned a long time ago. I got to get some help if I'm going to have to talk about any of this. I got to be really
right,
careful. I don't
right.
put my written foot in my mouth, so to speak.
Yeah, I've as I mentioned, I've edited about 2,000 letters.
Mm,
And one thing that I've found is really genuinely called humble servants of God rarely know how to get what's in their heart out on a page
hmm
that people can understand and even feel stirred by. And so a
Which is
coach can,
humbling, really humbling, because you
yeah,
might be a dynamic communicator in real life, but it's a whole different ball game when you're trying to get it down on paper or in an
right,
email.
right. And so a coach can help draw that out. And that's something that I learned a long time ago was, I don't want them to write my letter and I don't want them to sound like me. And my help around the letter has been listening to them, hearing what God's done in them, and I'll lure them into this conversation where I really get them talking about their passion, and I really get them talking about, if they had to do one or two things to be successful in God, what would it be? And
hmm
once I get them talking that way and their shoulders come back and they sit up a little straighter and their smile comes to their face, then I just suddenly break in and say that right there, that's what we want to put on paper.
Mm,
And then I help them do that. And so coaching can also be a little bit of strategy.
for
We
sure.
we look at the front end of a partnership season, and a person says, "Hey, I think I can have 12 or 15 meetings and maybe this one speaking engagement." And I talk with them about 10 minutes and suddenly their opportunity triples. And I go, "Wow," and so now they add a week or two to the trip, or they wind up being much busier for that 2 weeks. It's about getting them more opportunity, but also a coach can come alongside them when they get discouraged. We hear our model, we hear no about 70% of the time.
Mm,
So somewhere around 30 to 33% of the people we approach say yes. And you hear a no, it can be discouraging. And if you hear several of them in a row, it can be really discouraging.
yep, for
And
sure.
a coach, has been there before. They've felt that kind of mild defeat and discouragement, but they know that they pressed through it and they know that they got on the other side of it and they wound up fully funded. And so
Yep,
a
yep.
coach can be there and say, "Hey, I know how you feel, but
Yeah.
but let's keep this in mind and let's keep going," and can share a testimony or something with them.
Yeah, and
And
it can really talk you down from the ledge, so to speak,
oh
and
yeah,
help you battle, negative self-talk or maybe even lies you began to believe. Or
oh yeah,
sometimes a coach can even, and hopefully in a loving, gentle way, point out that hey, you might not be so spiritually healthy right now. Like
right,
you're taking this as a personal attack, and
right,
that's not what they said. And
right.
kind of help parse and understand mid process. I know I needed that. I won't tell a long story, but just a quick one. I've shared before about a family member that Rob, I had it in my mind that this guy was going to say yes.
Mhm,
He was a deacon at a church. They were past the point where they had kids living in the house, so they were double income, no kids, and
mhm.
doing very well, very very well. And when I invited him to join my team, he kept changing the topic.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, in my spiritual unhealth, I was angry. I
Hmm.
was embarrassed. I
Hmm.
was, feeling pretty self righteous, and I mean, by God's grace, I did process through that, and I'm able to see that now. But wow, it would have been great during that
Right.
time to
Right.
have an MPD coach that was checking in weekly, who would say, "Hey, how you doing?" And I could be like, "Not so great," and have
Right.
somebody kind of help me process that a lot better. That would have saved me some real extended heartache that, quite honestly, was unnecessary. That
Yeah.
it wasn't on me to make him say yes or no. Was he rude? Sure, but that had nothing to do with my response. My response had to do with
Yeah.
my spiritual health at the time. A coach could have pointed that out.
Yeah. Aaron, something very similar to what you just described that we've seen, in the last 14 years is the more that technology develops and the more we develop our cell phone culture, people not picking up the phone when you dial them is quite normal.
Yep.
But I've noticed that when someone's in a partnership development season and they're trying to call them in response to a letter they sent and they don't pick up the phone, the missionary immediately interprets that as you're avoiding me.
Mm,
And they get upset and they get stressed. And I have to show them that no, cell phone culture, it's going to take 4 or 5 dials for them to even respond. And we probably ought to think about sending a text first.
hmm
Well, when
hmm
that missionary realizes that that pattern has nothing to do with support raising, but rather it's a cultural normal thing, then the coach is able to help calm them down and not let them kind of spin out, you know.
Right.
And
Right.
and so, being there to help them with that. Also, they can start wrestling with negative thoughts. And
hmm
sometimes the coach can say, "Hey, who's the author of that thought? Where is that coming from?"
Yes.
It,
Oh,
it,
that's such an important thing to point out. Oh, it's huge. You could say that
yeah,
again.
yeah.
That's
Is,
where is
is
that
the
coming
Holy,
from? That's a big deal.
is the Holy Spirit saying that? Is God
Right.
saying that to you right now?
hmm hmm
Is the
or
enemy?
are you
You
speaking
know?
out of a place of pain, and that elicited a memory from something else, maybe back in junior
Yeah,
high, and you're applying it to the like it's yeah, that you bring some baggage with you into support
yeah,
raising. You
yeah,
really do. And you might think, oh, that that argument I had in the lunchroom in eighth grade, that had nothing to do with this. Well, maybe it didn't, but maybe also you're completely bringing that in because you just felt like you got told to go sit at a different table, and you're upset about that.
yeah, yeah. That's so true. And Aaron, in the 14 years that I've been coaching, there's times that you have to put on your pastoral hat and
Oh man, yep.
and
So
really
true.
serve a missionary and be patient and be kind and help them through the situation. And there's been other times, based on my experience, I have to say, "Hey, you're stalling.
Yep.
Let's
Yep.
pick up the phone. I'll do it with you, and I'll sit with them, and I'll have them make the phone call, and I'll do it right there with them."
Yeah.
And in fact, I was teaching a course. I had about 20 missionaries in the room, and we were at the point of the training where we were talking about phone call, and they're all panicked. They're all wanting to reconsider new careers, and
Yep.
because that's when the training gets real, is when you hit
Yeah.
phone call stage. And
Oh, yeah.
and I
Have to
just
do death
called
throes boot
one.
camps too.
I called one young man out and said, "Hey, let's make a call right now, right here in front of the class." And he came up and he did it with me, and he did it on speaker. And the gentleman said, "Hey, I'm happy to meet, but I'm not going to be able to partner with you. But I'd love to meet with you and hear what you're saying." And he goes, "And I would like to share a $500 gift with you."
Oh,
And he responded, said thank you, and we wound down the call. But that changed the whole atmosphere of the room,
right.
and all the trainees saw that this guy, is not going to partner as a monthly partner, but it went okay. And he was actually nice, and he didn't yell at the missionary, and the missionary didn't feel all defeated. And they went, "Okay, I'm excited now. I can do it."
Yep. He
And
didn't
so,
say, "Get away from me, Satan. Never talk to me again. Why did you call me?" It was probably just a little bit more pleasant than that. And
yeah, he
yeah,
was, he was very polite. And even when people say no, they're polite. But a coach can be there And through wisdom, through experience, a lot of trial and error. Honestly, Aaron, I could write a book for coaches on 100 things not to do.
Right.
You
I
know,
think I could as well.
and
Maybe we should collaborate on that.
unfortunately, sometimes in our parenting, if we have 3 or 4 children, often we do better with the second and the third and the fourth than we did the first.
Right,
We're
right.
younger. We're younger. We have less experience, and so we've learned that through coaching as well. But Aaron, there's many times that we've been very pastoral and just had to nurture someone and help them through a season. And there's been other times people were just tired and wanted to quit, and we reminded them of their call in God and reminded them of the fruit of their life, and that
Hmm.
inspired them to keep going. And there's so many stories I could tell you where someone would have quit around $700 or $800, but the coach was able to help them, talk them through a season, come
Hmm.
alongside them, and really link arms with them for a period. And that same person that nearly quit, is now fully funded in Eastern Europe with $4,000 a month, and we've had so many people say, Rob, you changed my life. And I know what they mean by that. And I don't really want to take the full credit for changing their life, but I do understand that we were enough of an impact and enough of an influence
Hmm.
that they stuck with it and they changed the course of their life, you know.
Well, you bring up something. I want to encourage people that maybe they're moving towards having a coach, maybe they already have one, but you as a coachee, potentially, you being coaches, raising support, you have to be real. You have to ask questions. You have to share fears. Um, I had a friend who, in a real tragic situation, lost a child not long before he began raising support, and boy, did that colored a lot of things in his process. And yeah, kind of like what you're talking about, Rob. There's some opportunities to be loving and pastoral towards him. Now he needed to get fully funded, but there were some times where, understandably, he was pretty paralyzed and moving forward on some
Right.
certain things. There was just a lot of grief there, and
Yeah.
but that grief actually was a very real thing. I don't downplay that at all. But that, for the most part, wasn't what keeping him from moving forward. He wanted to blame that, but that really wasn't it. And as we spent
Yeah.
some time and began processing, and I was coaching him, we were actually able to uncover a really significant but simple thing that he needed to adjust in his presentation that made all the difference in what he was communicating. But until until we took the time to, like, we did like a group cohort thing, and then we were doing like a one-on-one phone call because I knew something was up. Until we took the time to do that, he probably just would have quit. I mean, he
Yeah.
probably just would have gave up, and because they'd have been like, "Well, this isn't for me. This is for everybody else." So, people, like, we definitely encourage you to have a coach. If your organization has one, fantastic. So long as they've been fully funded themselves. That's kind of my big my
Yeah.
big thing. I don't believe in having coaches that have never modeled it when it comes to support raising. But if not, I would encourage people, find a coach. There's different. We've already mentioned some things on here, but yeah, there are some different ways to get a coach. But at the end of the day, I want to kind of close out this benefits thing that we're talking about, Rob. And I
Hmm.
know that you have like a little bit of statistics or
Hmm.
some results that you've seen from coaching over the years. And so we're kind of not pulling on people's heartstrings. We're kind of explaining them the pastoral, the heart stuff, but there's some actual like numbers involved here. Can you share a little bit what you've discovered in that arena?
Right. Right. Yeah, we've gathered a lot of data, within our organization over about a 10-year period. We use what we call a weekly reporting tool where they document their efforts, the
Hmm.
number of times they dial the phone, how many meetings they have, financial outcomes, and so forth. And what we have seen is when a missionary works with a coach, they raise about 35% more funding.
Mm. Wow.
Now, 35% doesn't sound like it's that big a deal, But what it really means is when you set a financial goal and you set a real budget, if you come up 35% short, then your life isn't going to work. You're That's too big of deficit to try to make up. And so it's the difference of success or not success.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
one of the other things that we've seen that's somewhat related to that statistic is about 70%. Excuse me, I'm saying that wrong. If a missionary works without a coach, about 70% of the time, they won't finish their support raising season. They'll stop. They'll stop short.
Man, stop the presses.
Yeah. Yeah. They'll spend, the 3 or 4 or 5, 6 months that they've allotted.
Mm-hmm.
They'll work at it. They're having 10 or 12 appointments a week. Then it diminishes to 5, and then it diminishes to 1 or 2. And then they just get to where they just aren't doing it anymore. And so,
70% of the time, people are going to stop without reaching their goal if they don't have
right,
a coach.
if they don't have a coach.
That's
Now,
hey folks, uh, to all our
right,
listeners,
right.
let us be clear. We're not here to beat anybody over the head. I think if anything, what Rob and I are saying here is, regardless of your Great Commission organization that you're with, it might be super strategic for you to make sure that there's some coaching going on for people that are raising their support, whether they're new staff or they're veteran staff, or everything in between. Whether it's in-house coaching, or we'll call it outhouse coaching, or you bring somebody in from outside, or you seek somebody outside.
Mhm.
Wow, that's a significant game changer. If you
Right,
don't have a coach, you're just not very likely to make it, right?
right, right. And what's tricky about that, Aaron, is in their mind, they did it for 6 months. And, I've had to point out to them, you did partnership development really well for about 3.5 months. But the last month and a half, we can't really call it partnership development. And so they think they did their campaign, and my number is what it is. That's just what the Lord provided. And that's the tricky part is they went out, they had a measure of success, and they just assumed that that's how much money God was going to give them.
Mm,
But when we've shown them the data and consistently with dozens and dozens of missionaries every year over a 10-year period, when those who work with a coach, you know, almost always without fail raise a significantly larger portion of money, then you've got to say, no, that's what God really wanted to do, you know, or,
right.
we want to be kind and pastoral in it, but sometimes, the missionary doesn't want to work with a coach because they want a little bit of wiggle room. Some of them feel more confident in ad-libbing their own model just a little bit. And
Oh, that's never a problem. What are you talking about?
yeah, yeah. And
I've never done this before. I'm an expert.
um, I had a friend that said it this way one time. He said, "Hey, if you want Rob Parker's world-class cookies, you have to follow his world-class recipe."
Yeah, that's
You know,
great. That's
and
great.
and I know what he meant, and obviously it's not world-class, but the point he was making is, well, I've used the analogy often about exercise. Um, you got to buy more than a gym membership to get in shape, and you have to do more than buy the jogging suit and get the tennis shoes. You actually have to get on the treadmill and you have to stay on it.
Hmm.
And a little 5-minute workout twice a week is not going to get you in shape. You
Right.
And so the coach can, lay out that strategy and lay out those best practices and lay out the requirements, and then be there to assist and to lead and to inspire and to guide.
Yeah.
And then some months down the road, 3 or 4 months down the road, suddenly, the missionary's funded.
Yeah.
And wow. And so
Makes a big
uh,
difference. Well,
what's
I
really,
love your quote there. I'm going to say it again because I think it's very quotable. 70% of people who don't have an MPD coach will stop short of their vision driven need. Rob
Right.
Parker, author of The Fully Funded Missionary. Can we quote you on that, sir?
Yes, please go right ahead. And
That's great. Well,
it's so
let's segue.
true.
So I want to talk a little about organization. And I realize we have most of our audience, they're not necessarily in organizational leadership, but we're at least going to touch on this because I think it's important. And Rob, honestly, I don't know your opinion on this. I have some opinions on this. Like, I don't
Mhm.
think we're probably going to have a spirited debate, but it would be interesting to get your viewpoint on this as well. I've heard people suggest that support raising coaching, MPD coaching, FPD coaching, whatever you want to call it, that should be a part of human resources. I've had
Mhm.
other people suggest that no, that coach should be somebody who's just a staffer. I've had people suggest that the coach is also also is in charge of accountability. So they're supposed to play the good cop and the bad cop. And
Mhm.
I've heard people say, well, no one can really do it well if they're inside the organization. You should only use a third party coach. So there's a lot of opinions out there. I'd be
Mhm.
happy to share mine, but I want to start with you. What are your thoughts? That's a pretty broad topic, but for the sake of our listeners that might not be in organizational leadership, could you kind of narrow at least what the opinion that you've arrived at over the years on that
Yeah.
particular topic?
Yeah, Aaron, that's a great question. And please hear me out. I'm going to answer in two parts.
Okay.
Uh, Number one, I think anyone who's successfully raised support, regardless of their department, regardless of where they work in the organization, I think anyone who has successfully raised support and cares about workers being funded can successfully coach. Now, what I mean by that is they have the knowledge, they know how important it is, they have some skill sets, they know some best practices, and they can be there to help the coach. And so, but that person, I think I said help the coach, they can be there to help the missionary. But, but what I've found effective is that successful missionary who's raised their own support, who can be a successful coach. I think it's helpful to do it within the context of a style, a model, and a system that has been designed by the HR department and is overseen by the HR department.
Okay.
And so it's a partnership between the staff person and the HR department.
Okay.
And I think where that mostly comes in is the HR department helps establish realistic goals and really clear expectations about what kind of funding you should be thinking about and what are some bare minimums and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and then the coach can be there to help the missionary reach that goal that HR has helped establish.
Okay. Good.
Uh, then also with accountability, you can have a coach that's very inspiring, very encouraging, very uplifting. But when the rubber meets the road and there has to be a little bit of a tougher conversation, often it helps if that coach is backed up by the HR department
Yes.
or he knows when to call in the HR department and let's have three people in this meeting now. And so I think it works best to do it in-house versus a third party,
Mm-hmm.
but I think it works best where the coach isn't working alone and neither is HR working alone, but
Right.
together they form a team that serves the missionary.
Great.
Uh,
Great.
that's my opinion.
Okay.
That's what we've done here in Kansas City
Yeah.
over the years. And in fact, when I'm asked, to help with an organization, they maybe want me to come out and do a 1 week training or something.
Mm-hmm.
I schedule into that week time to meet with leadership, HR, payroll, and I help them develop an infrastructure within their organization and an expectation that can best serve the employee and create a culture and that that creates a positive current and a momentum that pulls the missionary along. If you don't have that, the missionary's, kind of like the salmon. He's swimming against, the stream all the time.
Right. Right.
So that partnership, between the organization and the coach, and the organization and the employee, is so critical. So critical.
Well, I don't think my opinion is really that different than yours. I have a slightly different, but it's not too major. I'll just touch on it briefly. I'm with you. I think it's ideal if you have a in-house organizational coach. I really do think that's ideal.
Mhm.
However, where I kind of might parse a little bit on that is if that person's really focused on that. Unfortunately, I've had just a lot of coaches that, they are the coach for their organization and they're just so torn. Like they don't really have the time to really focus on it. And they're trying to do that, but they're also trying to launch a new ministry, or they have significant responsibilities in leading something that it almost feels like a completely different animal. And so to a certain degree, I guess what I have seen work best, at least in my opinion, is where that coach, I'm not saying it's the only thing they're allowed to do, but it's their primary focus. It's their primary thing.
Right.
And short of that, then I think it's great to use a third party coach, so to speak. However, not for the accountability side. So I would be of the mindset that there does need to be a supervisor or HR, somebody within the organization that's helping to measure, is this person doing what we would anticipate or what we would expect of them during their support raising season?
Right.
I hate to call them the bad cop, but yeah, they're making sure the person who is allegedly going to work full time for the ministry is actually working on the things that they said they would.
Right.
That frees up the coach, whether the coach is in-house or whether the coach is a third party. That frees up the coach to be the coach, and to not have to kind of get into all the measurement things.
Right.
And I say that honestly, where I'm a little bit out of loss. There was a time where I was trying to wear both hats for an organization,
Right.
and I think it cost me some friendships, to be honest. People started ducking because, I wasn't just their friend that loved them, was praying for them and coaching them. I was also the person that could potentially get them fired if they weren't doing their job well. And so forgive me if I'm putting too much of my own story in there, but that's where I'm great with there being a third party coach or an in-house coach. I'm fine with that. But the accountability portion, yeah, for sure. I think that does need to be some sort of supervisor or human resources, somebody who is separate than the coach. Did I explain that well enough? Does that make sense to you?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does. And in fact, your explanation reminded me of something that I think is worth noting. I made mention that any staff member that successfully raised support, that cares, can really help somebody. But to be honest, the context we've been in, I'm the trainer. I train the employee. And then I sit down and do a lot of the prep work with the employee, a lot of the editing, a lot of the strategy, a lot of the language. And when they're really ready, and now they leave Kansas City and go out and raise support, now I hand them off to one of our certified coaches. And that coach, who's not a full-time coach and has lots of other ministry responsibilities, he's getting someone that's already been prepared, strategies already laid out, materials already edited. They're ready to rock and roll. But now they're going to take over the portion of that when they're having meetings. And now they're there for encouragement, accountability, and it's a 15-minute phone call once a week and an email. And so,
so to a certain degree, they're kind of set up to be kind of a short-term specialist. So they still have a role, but it was set up for them very well, where it's not really time. It's not taking a lot of time, and it only turns into something else if it's not working.
It's a little bit of a hybrid, and I realize maybe some organizations couldn't quite do it that way. But I am the primary coach within our organization and the trainer, but I get them to a point where they're ready to go. Now someone who has experience and history can help them. Sometimes I'm there to get called in and offer assistance.
Mhm.
And so we got a little bit of a hybrid, but you're right. If the organization doesn't have like a designated person and you just have a handful of staff members who can maybe give a few minutes to it, a week maybe, and maybe only take on one or two missionaries, it's going to be tough.
Yeah.
It's going to be
Yeah.
tough. Every organization needs the partnership guy.
Yeah.
And in fact,
Yeah.
when I go and train at other organizations, usually within a week, that person will emerge, and I can see them. It's that person who's asking the right questions, drawing the right conclusions.
Yep.
By the end of the week, they're almost finishing my sentences for me.
In some ways, it's like a choir. There's a lot of people who can be a choir. There's only a couple that could sing solos.
That's
Like, let's just be honest about that. Everybody can sing, but
find them.
yeah. So
You know.
it doesn't hurt to be pretty careful about who you put in that role. In fact, I hope people will. So
Yeah.
Well, Rob, I realized the last part of this podcast, we kind of jumped into organizational support raising MPD coaching theory, but I appreciate the conversation because I have it so frequently. And of course, we both have quite a bit of experience in being involved with training and coaching and things like that. So I think it's good for our listeners that have held on here to the end to hear some thoughts and hear some processes. And of course, I'll mention that these type of conversations, they happen frequently at the Support Raising Leaders Conference that is open to people from all sorts of organizations. The next one is scheduled for April in 2021, and sure hoping people can be a part of that. We plan to do it in real life. I suppose there's still that possibility it could go digital, but that's not our intent. That's not our hope. That's not our plan. But people can find out more about that on the supportraisingsolutions.org website. But in the meantime, Rob, man, I really appreciate you taking the time and just kind of talking about what is a partnership development coach and what are those benefits. I think your stats going to stick with me for a while. But what I like to do at the end of a podcast is invite the guest to kind of give a final 30-second or so exhortation, admonition, what have you. So most of our people listening probably are early on in their support raising journey, or they're veterans who are realizing they need to raise a little bit more. So what would you say to those folks, Rob?
Yeah, I would say make partnership development a priority and make it as an important skill set as learning how to teach, learning how to pastor. It's a skill set that you've got to put a priority on. Get the best training you possibly can. Get the best resources you possibly can. Determine on the front end that you're going to work for a coach or work with a coach, and together set realistic goals. Then you have to give it the proper time.
Yeah.
You have to give it the proper time. You cannot expect to raise $4,000 a month in a 10-day trip. You have to have realistic time frame, and then sit down with your coach, create a strategy, be diligent. We can inspire, we can show you technique, we can teach you Bible verses that'll give you confidence. But the one thing that we can't do is make you diligent. That is something that the missionary has to decide to do, is be diligent. And so get the best training, best coaching, best resources, give it proper time, be diligent, and stick with it until you reach your goal. I, in 14 years, have not met one person that regrets being fully funded.
That's the truth. That is the truth. It's going to take work, folks. And we hope you get knowledge. We hope you get training. But we certainly also hope that you plan for getting coaching as well. Rob Parker, thank you so much for joining us on the SRS podcast.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us for this episode. We would love to hear your ideas for future content. Please visit supportraisingsolutions.org/feedback to share your thoughts and questions. Also, wherever you download your podcast from, be sure to subscribe for future episodes and come back each week to gain more insight into the process of building and maintaining your personal support team.